Welcome to Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Futurum group. Each episode explores a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can find us on securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, TechStrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Before we begin today's episodes, let's meet the panel, starting with Ed.
Hi, Ed Weadon, recovering enterprise network architect, engineer, and with a minor in InfoSec.
Hello, everyone. Jonathan Davis for JD here. Great to join the podcast. I spend my time working with a systems integrator, mostly around wireless. And as most folks know, there's a lot of security overlap there. And so excited to be here.
Well, we're very happy to have you, and I'm ready to jump into the topic today because JD is actually the one who brought this to our attention, and we want to talk a little bit about exploits and how companies should approach things like responsible disclosure and coordination with their customers. Let's jump into that topic because I think that my guests are going to have a lot to say about it. Specifically, the thing we're talking about is FortiBleed, which is one that has popped up here recently. You know how it is, like it pops up right before we record one of our episodes, and then by the time we can get back to it, it's already, a lot of people have done a lot of discussion around it. But JD, this is something that you've been tracking quite a bit. I want you to kind of maybe give our audience just a quick overview. What is FortiBleed specifically, but more importantly, what is it about FortiBleed that made you want to jump on today and kind of talk about this bigger topic?
Well, yeah, I think, so just quickly recapping, as many folks know, Fortinet has had a few security vulnerabilities over the last several years that provided credentialed access into public connected FortiGates. So if you allowed admin access, if you allowed VPN, which of course they're regularly used for, there were several vulnerabilities that made it possible for threat actors to get access and in many cases create credentials on those FortiGates. And there were various, because there have been multiple exploits, there have been various paths for that to occur. I think the first one was, via, HTTPS, like, you could write config without having, an account. And so, of course, the first thing threat actors did was they created a new user, without actually being a user themselves. So that's where this started, right? A 2022 timeframe. And from that, we had this, we had a lot of devices that were compromised. Now, as we fast forward into June of this year, there was a gentleman who discovered a repository of that really looked like, okay, this is data from these public-facing internet FortiGates that is either A, being ready to be deployed, or I should say sold onto the market, or B, it's ready to be used in some sort of escalation. So that occurred, and I think one of probably the best websites out there, in my opinion, that kind of covers it is the Hudson Rock directory, where you can go out and you can search for an organization by domain. There are 73,932 compromised firewall URLs in their directory. And so you can actually see, okay, is this, does my organization happen to be one? Now, what's really interesting about this is the data that the researcher discovered was actually was more complete data than should have been allowed based on previous attacks. So, at a minimum, what we seem to be learning is is that every one of these firewalls that's affected had their complete configuration downloaded. So there are accounts that they have for some of these FortiGates that had every that had a secure password for that username, and the username was correctly encrypted within the system. And yet somehow they've been able to, well, not somehow, but they've been able to reverse that out. I've been saying a researcher. I should actually call him out. Vladimir Dashenko. I think he goes by Bob, if I remember correctly, is the guy who kind of first found it. He's put out some really great information. There's a lot of good information out there. Now, I think the other aspect of this is it's not just about compromising the firewall, because what they then did was they took any credentials that they found and they started to reverse the passwords out using a distributed GPU architecture so that they could actually begin cracking passwords. And it wasn't just FortiGate or Fortinet passwords. It was also passwords for things like Active Directory. If if that FortiGate was authenticating users. And so this is really just a launching point into the network. So that kind of summarizes, hopefully, FortiBleed. If you happen to have FortiGates in your network, I cannot stress high enough, go out to the Hudson Rock. It's hudsonrock.com/Fortinet and search for any domains that your company uses, especially for credentials, and see if you're in that list. So I think that's the intro to to FortiBleed. It's a deep rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a very fun time for people who are running FortiGate firewalls, but it also doesn't sound like a very fun time for Fortinet because, as you said, this is not the first time that we've heard of some kind of a vulnerability that Fortinet has had. And I mean, I'm going to tell people right now, I've been using FortiGate firewalls since OS 2.6. Like I was using 2.8. That was the first big thing I was doing when our company started buying them. And I remember at FortiOS 3.0, there was this huge bug where if your password had an @ symbol in it, it would crater the firewall when you upgraded it. And my first thought was, how does the system know that I have an @ symbol in my password? Because it should be storing the hash value of that password, not the actual password itself. But this is a problem because, like you said, they reversed the encrypted values for the user accounts, but then they started reversing the encryption for any other passwords that were connected to the system. Like we talk a lot about what happens if you can get into Active Directory, considering that it is the authenticated LDAP source for so many systems. You basically have free reign. I'm assuming that Fortinet disclosed this to all of their customers and immediately issued patches and created remediation plans.
Well, if they
is there
did,
egg on my face?
Yeah, if we did, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, right?
I was going to say, is it like the scene from Princess Bride? You'd like to think that, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Honestly, so I think especially in the current world that we live in with Mythos and everything else that's going on, I think we can all agree that none of us expect perfection from any vendor. What we expect is when those vulnerabilities are discovered, we expect that that's managed well. And I think that really is kind of I think that's what we pay for. Ultimately, that's why we maintain support contracts. That's why we maintain these relationships with these companies. In this case, the first response from Fortinet was a PSIRT blog 9 days after the information was put out, to the wide web. And it wasn't. It was. It covers important points. It covers the fact that much of this was due to previously known exploits. It covers the fact that there was a lot of password guessing and other things that was required to get access to these FortiGates. It covers the fact that these were FortiGates that were internet facing and had admin control from the internet, right? But it also comes across a little bit like this isn't our problem. We told you about this a long time ago. We issued firmware updates. This isn't our problem. And I think that's the most frustrating thing about this. Like you, Tom, I've been using FortiGates for a long time. I respect the company. I respect what they do. I think, especially from a value perspective, for a long time they've been one of the best players in the market. But I've been pretty disappointed with the response and kind of the way they've handled this. First and foremost, as soon as that database was published, the world had a list, not just FortiGate or Fortinet, but the world had a list of Fortinet customers that were impacted. And I would have expected a crisis management team to have been set up. I would have expected them to use the support contact information, every venue they had to contact every single customer in that database. And I would have expected it to happen really quickly. I also would have expected there to be real clarity on these are the steps. Now, I will say for that PSIRT blog, there was good information in it. At the bottom, there was a list of steps of here are the things to look for. Here are the accounts that you should be checking to find out, do those exist on your FortiGate? And you should be sure to remove those. There was good information in there. But again, that was 9 days later. And the reality is as of last Tuesday, so that would have been the 23rd, I still had customers that had not been contacted by their account teams. So that's an exceptionally long period of time that if customers aren't actively listening, if they're not actively paying attention to everything that's happening everywhere in the security industry because they have more on their plates, they were unaware. And so that I think that's the part that gives me pause here.
The response, I'm just kind of skimming through some of it now. I haven't followed it terribly closely, but JD, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's very disappointing to see vendors taking so much time because it kind of it plays to the optics of the vendors getting caught flat-footed. It's kind of the way that it feels. You take 9 days to respond to something that's when it's been dropped into the wild like this. And especially if it's stuff that is using attack chains that contain previous vulnerabilities that are patched previously. I mean, I don't disagree with the idea that there's a certain onus on a customer to make sure their environment is up to date. But having worked in a large organization, in fact, one of the organizations that's actually affected by this that got called out, I know how we managed code reviews, how we managed what code we were running on devices, and we were not always on the latest. I mean, there are so many things that go into that. Yes, there are things that you look at least you should be looking at and triaging, as you see these vulnerabilities come up. But at a certain point, it's a give and take process, right? Both sides have to come to the table and play with that. And there's kind of, there should be some sort of I don't want to say linkage, but there's a give and take from the customer and from the vendor as well. But yeah, I mean, the fact that some of these vulnerabilities have been out for a long, I mean, we see it. I don't know. I feel like in some ways we see some of this, not just with Fortinet, but we see it with Cisco, with Juniper, with other Microsoft, where we see vulnerabilities that have been out there for a long time. They are just not getting patched. In some cases, they're not actually getting patched in the code. So I think there's two things that jump out at me from this. Just listening to JD, listening to you talk, and just kind of what I've been kind of gleaning here in the last couple of minutes. But there's two things that's jumping out at me. One, the response of Fortinet is suboptimal. And I think we're only going to see a lot more of this. as we continue to see AI tool chains getting traction, getting maturity, and attackers are going to start leveraging them more and more and more. And you can try and hide certain models, mythos, behind the sovereign government walls. But there are other models out there, plenty of open source models that are just as good or better, that are going to yield the same level of visibility into organizations and uncover these kind of vulnerabilities left and right. We just kind of a little bit of listening to some of the training, some of the webinars that I've been sitting in on lately. A lot of them around network threat hunting, and a lot of them are leveraging AI, different AI frameworks and harnesses to actually really try and get ahead, or at least stay up to date, in terms of finding threat actors and finding vulnerabilities. But it's just going to speed up. We're just going to see more and more of it. And I think the disclosure piece is a piece that I think it's needed to be addressed for a long time. I don't think this is something unique to Fortinet. I don't think that this is something that's unique to any one given vendor. The responsible disclosure piece, I think, is something that has needed some tweaking over the last several years.
But we've already had to tweak it a couple of times, because one of the things that we learned from breach reporting was that companies were holding off as absolutely long as they could to avoid reporting it so that it didn't impact their stock price. And finally, the SEC had to step in and go, you have 4 days from the moment you find out to disclose that you have been breached. And you can't get coy about it. You can't claim, oh, it was this or it was this thing that wasn't that important. You have to tell people. It's along the same lines that we get from things like vehicle recalls, right? Like they have to publicly post that they have had a recall. They have to contact all of their customers, usually through mail, so that they know that it was delivered. And I've even been part of a recall, not for a car, but for another piece of equipment, where they sent out the recall notice and they said, in certain situations, this thing could catch on fire. And I'm like, I'll never be in that situation. I really don't care. And they sent me an email about 2 months later. They said, no, you don't understand. We have to get the part back. If we don't get the part back, we are in a lot of trouble. We will refund you the entire purchase price, but you have to send it to us. And I'm like, and I take what they did with that and then put it against my cybersecurity background, where I'll go all the way back to one of Microsoft's most famous ones, when they found out that if you popped a Windows 2000 server disk into a Server 2003 server and booted it, the recovery console was wide open. And Microsoft's response, rather than, oh, that's a problem, we should probably fix that, was, oh, well, if attackers have physical access to your server, then there's nothing we can do about it. I'm like, well, that was a fine kiss my butt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, to add to your point, I think all of us believe that in I'm going to say a post-mythos world, just to really describe like using AI, in the security space, right? In a post-mythos world, we know that vulnerabilities are going to be found faster. They're going to be more complex. We are certainly going to have more of these situations where, the attack has already been executed, right? Like, and attackers are taking their time. They're working longer behind the scenes before anything ever happens, right? We're going to have those experiences. So it really comes down to, here's the thing. Personally, I think just simply a disclosure is not enough. Especially when you're talking about companies that are paying for support. And support is doing nothing but getting more expensive. And in those environments, I think simply putting out a public disclosure and a 10-step, at the bottom of an email that basically says it's not our fault, 10 steps to, potentially fix your network type thing. That's not enough. I think it's really going to be these companies need to be beholden to their customers to actually manage these situations. Because when you think about FortiGate, I think a lot of folks maybe don't understand the scale that FortiGate has within the OT community. It obviously this impacts every every possible vertical you can think of. But FortiGates do incredibly well within the OT community for good reason. But if we think about the amount of information that's out there, and we think about the amount of known vulnerable environments, I don't think FortiGate has, and I don't think any company in this in that position can just simply say, "Yeah, we put a little information out there. We can wash our hands of it and walk away." You have to kind of you have to manage the situation a little more tightly.
I have a funny story about this because this is something that literally happened to me in my old line of work. I had a customer that we were doing monitoring for. And, the typical VAR MSP type thing of we'll keep an eye on all the stuff in your system and we'll tell you when you have outages and potential outages. Well, this was the new CIO for the company. And it was a school district. So he's basically CIO. And he comes in and we put the thing in front of him. And I'm a ride along engineer, right? And he's flipping through things. He gets the second page and he says something. And the sales guy that I'm with looks up and goes, "Well, if you blah, blah, blah," he goes, "I'm not finished reading yet." And he gets all the way through like all the pages and he goes, "So basically I'm paying you to tell me I have a problem that I probably already know that I have. And what am I paying you for again?" And the sales guy, all the color drained out of his face. And the CIO looked at me, he goes, "Does that sound about right to you?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not certainly going to argue with you." Like, I feel like JD has kind of got that point across about this, where a lot of companies, they're like, "Well, we told you that there's a problem. What more do you want?" I'm like, "For what I'm paying you, I want you to develop an action plan. I want you to work with me. I want to be able to call in and have support through this." And that's one thing I'll say about Cisco that I've dealt with over the years in my former support life. They'll babysit you on an upgrade. Like my favorite thing to do when I was doing call manager upgrades is I would pre-file a ticket with them. I'd be like, "All right, I need a ticket number. I'm going to open this up. And if you don't hear from me in a week, close it because we're done with it. But if anything breaks, I want to be immediately able to get to like second tier support because I've tried everything and I've had to use it a couple of times." And maybe if Fortinet or other security companies did that, where they're like, "We understand that this is a massive problem that you guys need to deal with, but we also understand that hitting these patching windows and doing all these other things is not easy." What if we immediately filed a tier 2 ticket and said, "Okay, if you run into a problem through the patching process, or you want somebody to sit on the phone while you do these 5 firewalls just to make sure that nothing's going to break, we will be there for you." I think that would go a long way to extending kind of a olive branch helping hand type of thing to customers to say, "We understand that we screwed up here and we want to help you fix it."
And my business side counter to that is, but that costs money in
Oh, it
people.
does. It
It
absolutely
does.
costs money.
Yeah, it does. And I think that goes to the piece that a lot of, I'm going to speak in generalities, but I think there are vendors out there who don't really, I get the sense from some vendors that it's like support's, I don't want to say an afterthought, but it's more of a necessary evil. And you have good and you have bad. I mean, Cisco Tech, at least in my experience in the past, has been pretty good in a lot of cases. Um, I mean, you talked about pre-filing tickets, Tom. I mean, we did that. In my previous shop, that was part of standard upgrade procedures. We always filed tickets with the vendors to have them on standby if we ran into a major problem, especially if it was a major upgrade, like we were doing major data center work, or even cloud instance work. I mean, we would have tickets open and ready so that if something, the proverbial poop slams in the fan at 2 a.m, well, you already have a ticket, start triage. And there were some times where we had to leverage that. It wasn't often, but when we did, it was good to have. But yeah, in an increasing world where we're seeing cost pressures put on, businesses to cut cost, leverage AI support, for things like support. We're starting to see that happen in like, tier one. Yeah, it's even saying some of the tier two stuff potentially. That's where I think we're going to start running into some serious problems and some really serious blowback on vendors.
Now, JD, I know that you've been tracking this a lot, especially from the Fortinet side, but I'm going to guess that Fortinet's not the only company that has these problems. Is this hopefully just something that you're seeing from a few vendors that are making this, or is this an industry-wide shift to say, we're going to provide the patches and it's on you to just kind of fix it yourself?
That's a great question. And I should also call out, even in this data set that was released, there were certainly other vendors in there. Palo Alto was in there, Sophos was in there, right? Like there were other vendors that were also kind of in that in the total data set. And so the question then becomes, well, how's their response been? But I think more to your point, how does the industry respond? And I think the reality is what we see often is the industry responds to protect shareholder value. Like that is the response that goes out, right? And I think that's a problem, especially in the security field. But I think it's really across the board because whenever we as a customer, when you choose a security product, to cover that first, we expect that security product to be secure, and we expect that company to ensure it stays secure and helps us to secure it. Right? We have we have best practices guides to ensure that we do everything right, and all of this kind of on the front end, all of this instruction to ensure we are checking the boxes. But I don't know that what we see is, to your point, Tom, I don't think we see across the board. I don't think we see enough from companies that are willing to kind of go that extra step.
I mean, I would even argue in some cases we've seen some instances where the companies have gone after the security researchers.
Yeah, zero question. And that's I think Microsoft is the one that we're probably all thinking of. We saw some a lot of news. Tom, I believe you guys even spoke about that a couple of weeks ago on Security Boulevard, where you were discussing Microsoft's poor response to a security researcher that was ultimately trying to, contribute valuable information, but they didn't like the way the information was handled, and of course the researcher didn't like the fact that they weren't being appropriately reimbursed for that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, Ed.
And it's a growing problem, right? Because companies want to provide all of this valuable information, but they don't want to get a black eye from it because it might make the stock price go down. And they want everybody to play by their rules. So yes, we'll wait until the last possible day that we have to disclose this. And then, we're going to say that the patch was already ready 2 weeks ago, but there was insert excuse here. But it really does feel like that what's driving this is not the overall safety and security of the user base. It's how big of an impact is this going to have on our stock price. And I feel like that is the wrong yardstick to be measuring from. And fortunately, right now we're kind of over a barrel, because if we've bought these devices and they're kind of sunk costs in the organization, it's not like you can go to your CEO or your board and say, hey, I need $50 million to rip out all that stuff we just bought a couple of years ago because it turns out that their support sucks. You're going to get, well, is it working? Well, is it going to cause us any problems? Maybe on the next round you can say that you're going to pay closer attention to that. But we all know what's going to happen is that the vendor of record is going to come in and be like, well, you already own our stuff. What if we just gave you like a huge, like 40% discount off of everything? You'd stay with us, right? And you'll get overruled every time because once again, money wins that argument.
Well, and that's where the argument needs to be. The challenge there and this is something we see on within technical people, the engineers side communicating with the business side. We see this problem all the time. You need to be able to communicate in their language. Hey, we stay with this vendor. This is the potential risk we're opening up, given these past experiences. Or hey, we need to rip out and replace these devices because they're exposing us to a certain level of risk that can have a material financial impact. When you could say, hey, brand reputation, loss of customer data, et cetera, and stuff like that, and you start wrapping dollar numbers around it, suddenly people will start paying attention, especially when you say, hey, by the way, this has potential impact to us and it can negatively impact the share price.
So you move the conversation away from the vendor's shareholders into your own shareholders, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a certain irony there. I do agree with that, but I mean it.
But it's an absolute valid point.
Yeah, I mean,
I think when we consider where we are now, in the AI world that we live in, with all of the threats that come along with that, but we also look forward several years. We're kind of at an interesting place because aside from the fact that we have lots of nation state actors who are choosing, to take everything online, to essentially move war online. So we have that occurring. We have the explosion of AI and AI's capabilities and what that can do for us. But then we also have this impending PQC migration and everything that's kind of coming from the fact that we can no longer use, in only a few years, we will no longer be able to use a lot of the cryptography that we currently use. We're looking at basically a decade ahead of us that's going to be unlike any decade we've ever experienced. And so I really do think it's going to be on these vendors to take a step forward and figure out what their response looks like and how they should be managing those relationships with their customers and the product that they've shipped. Especially, and I want to reiterate this, especially whenever there's a support contract involved. Like that support contract is more than just simply being able to call and ask for a question or ask for help. It's security updates, it's firmware updates, it's all of those things. And I firmly believe that right now, what most vendors are providing to that in a support contract, when you consider that's a lot of times it's 20% of the cost of the equipment. So you're essentially paying for that equipment twice over a 5-year period. I don't think we're doing enough when I think about where we're heading in the next 5 years.
All right, gents, I think we're going to have to wrap it there because there's more to this story that we could spend a lot of time talking about, but I'm sure that we'll come back to it later. Maybe we'll give Fortinet and Microsoft and a bunch of these other companies a few weeks or months to prove to us that they were listening and they have taken our messages to heart. And if not, well, then I'll invite you both back on, and we'll set up a nice bonfire with some popcorn and enjoy ourselves. Before we go, JD, if people want to check out some of the stuff that you're working on, where can they go to learn that?
Thanks, Tom. Check out bitbucketlabs.com. I just published a website in 1.0 version that talks through wireless security and all of the various protocols from the very first beacon all the way to the first encrypted data frame. It's out there. And of course, there's more information on the website on where to find me and how to reach out.
Awesome. And if people want to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing, where can they go to do that?
Poke around on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. I'm slowly but surely starting to come back into the posting side of things.
Well,
so
a pleasure to have you both on here with me today. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Security Boulevard Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of our episodes. We would also appreciate it if you'd leave us a rating, a review, and some commentary to help the show grow. This podcast is brought to you by SecurityBoulevard.com and the Futurum Group. If you want to check out show notes and see other episodes, head over to SecurityBoulevard.com or the TechStrong TV website or the TechStrong TV app, which is available on Apple TV, Roku, Google, and pretty much everything that is smart. Follow Security Boulevard on X, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just look for Security BLVD for lots of extra content. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see everybody next week.